Awesome. Well, here we are at the St. Paul Ice Fishing and Winter Sports Show. I got some awesome guests for you today. You know, this is such a great time. We have pros that have come in from all over walks of life, from Washington to Maine, everywhere in between. We've met some pretty amazing people. Obviously, joining me is Jason Durham. I had to pull him out of the Reed's booth. You've been down there selling like a madman.
Well, I've been doing some selling, but more than anything is just connecting with consumers.
Yeah.
Man, there's so many people from so many different states at this event, and everybody's got a story about ice fishing.
Yeah.
Everybody wants to know more information. Everybody wants to show you pictures on their phone about what they did last season,
Yeah.
a big fish that they've caught or a trip that they've taken. And some people we don't see except for once a year at this show.
Which is sad.
It's sad, but it's kind of like a reunion of sorts, too. And I don't know how many people I talked to today that have never been to this show before.
Really?
And the Reed's booth is right at the entrance of the show. So they come in and it's overwhelming.
Yeah.
They're like, oh my gosh, I had no idea what this was going to entail.
They're stopped by the dimples.
Well,
and they want to say hi.
They're stopped by the product.
Okay.
And then they just happen to see me standing there to chat. But if you've never been here before, this is the show to go to.
The Super Bowl.
It's the Super Bowl.
And speaking of which, we got Scott Brauer here from New York, the man behind Maki. So talking about anglers and friends and, you know, camaraderie from all over the ice belt, there you go, literally across the country. So we're welcoming Scott, and Scott's got a really special guest joining us as well. You guys probably know each other.
We do a little bit, yeah. And you know what? I'm so fortunate. And one of the things that always comes to mind when I think about the importance of ice fishing, and that is family, right?
100%.
So, you know, it's no secret that my son has traveled a lot with me, fished a lot of tournaments with me. Very rarely, because Maron is a medical professional. She was in school for way too long and still probably paying that back a little bit because Dad didn't pay for everything. But my daughter Maron is here, and she was able to come out with me this time. And she's been integral from the very beginning in the Maki story, including naming Maki Plastic, really. And, you know, she just came out. She's 30 years old. We don't get time together like we used to because we're a real tight-knit family who eats around the dinner table. Our decisions for Maki Plastic, our boardroom is our dinner table. Like, we throw everything out on the table and say, what are we going to do next? Yeah. And so, you know, it's been a lot of fun and a great blessing for me as a dad, and then also this show too, as we all come together as that ice family. For me to have her with me this year is super special too. So, Maron?
Yeah, absolutely. It's my first time to the show. It's awesome. It's crazy to see everybody here for the same purpose.
Yeah.
I think it's really cool, and like you said, everybody's kind of showing off their pictures and catching up with everybody, so it's really neat to see, for sure.
And Maron has set up shows with
too.
me for years,
right?
And she can attest to the size and the scope of this compared to some of the other ice shows that we do throughout the country. There's nothing like this show, and I would say probably maybe even in the world. If you guys know of something different. But I said when I was coming out here to my students, because I told them that I wasn't going to be there on Friday, had to take a personal day, only get one, and I use it to come to this show every year. And I was telling them this is the biggest ice event, I think, in the world, at least in the country.
I think it is. I mean, I don't want to be quoted on that, but I know at least in our demographic of what we consider the ice belt here across North America, northern part of the United States, I don't know of a bigger ice fishing specific event. There might be some winter shows, but when this show started, there was an ice fishing booth. There wasn't a clam booth. It was the winter sports show, and there was one section that said the word ice fishing on a banner above it, and that was it.
Right.
And now you're talking 3 different levels, multiple rooms, all truly ice fishing. Yep. So I think from an ice fishing perspective, this has got to be the biggest show.
I would think so.
Yeah.
And I'm really excited about today because, Scott, you and I have talked numerous times over the years.
Yep.
I don't think we've ever gotten to actually fish together.
No, we've not.
And
well, maybe at one of the icing universities early on.
I was thinking maybe we did, but the one thing about those events, too, is you're right next to people who are there as guests, and you're trying to help them out.
Yep.
But really, we see each other at these events, and we get to talk briefly. We've sat down and talked in length a few times over the years. But to sit down with you and your daughter, have Maron here, and ask questions and have that connection is hugely meaningful to me.
And I think that's one of the things I love most about ice fishing is you get the opportunity to do that with the person right next to you.
Yeah.
Right.
So, and it doesn't, and you never know who you're going to bump into out on the ice. I mean, you could pull your pail up to a person who owns a business. You could pull your pail up to a guy who owns a farm. You could pull your pail up to a person who it's their very first time or it's their 80th year out on the ice. And that's one of the things that I love so much about this sport is it's not like when someone pulls a jet ski up next to you, you want to fight them. It's you pull a bucket up next and say, hey, what's going on? What are you using? How's it going?
Have you been on Lake Minnetonka?
No, I've not. So maybe that is maybe that's a thing. But out east, we're much more user friendly. We love each other. Everybody out on the ice.
Yeah.
I rolled my eyes when I said that. It might pick up on the cameras.
I think this is amazing. You know, I've got a chance to talk to Scott many times throughout the years, and I have a son who's 14. You know Jack well,
Yeah.
And he always tells me like one of the people he likes to talk to the most of these shows is you. And I said why, and he's like, because I'm always learning something.
Yeah.
And they just did a junior pro panel.
Yep.
That his MC did up there, and we asked something like, okay, what's one thing about the show, or what's one thing you really want to be better at this season? Let's say that you're going to do a takeaway. And Jack said, I want to be better understanding, he said these words, aquatic insects and how they act in the environment. And I'm like, what? And even the crowd is like, what? And he goes, well, there's this guy named Scott. He owns this company called Maki, and he knows everything about aquatic insects. And the reason I catch so many fish is because Scott makes plastics that look like aquatic insects. And I'm like, okay. I'm looking around for Scott, like, okay, what kind of brownie points are you trying to earn here at this point? But it's just case in point, right? You're the ability to create something that people, in my mind, don't really fathom and turn it into fishing. We're going to get into this. I'm probably getting ahead of myself. Is pretty darn cool. And I think before we jump too far down that road, I always like to ask a question, really, how did you get into fishing? I love hearing this story from all these different people we've had them. We did it back and forth to kick off this whole podcast series. And I don't know that answer. Like, I know Scott Brauer as the man behind Maki, and that's how I was introduced to you.
Right.
But I don't know Scott Brauer as a 4-year-old kid catching tadpoles by the river. I don't know. So how did that ball get pushed down the hill for you in fishing?
So I grew up in a small town, Middleport, New York. We're right on the Erie Barge Canal. The Erie Barge Canal is a system that used to move stuff from Buffalo to Albany, Niagara Falls to Albany. In that environment, there's several, and they were called log ponds because they used to push logs down there. So they were called log ponds. So that was only about 3 blocks from my house, so I could ride my bike there. So as a kid, I spent most of my summers, like almost all of us did, falling in love with the water and everything about the water. So I would first go down, and off the vertical walls, I would catch crayfish, and then I would take the crayfish and catch fish beyond that. So that's probably, my guess would be, where my love for trying to figure all of that puzzle out is, and that is you catch one piece of, that fish puzzle to catch the next piece of the fish puzzle. But ice fishing specifically, so there was a great neighborhood guy, and he had a great big station wagon, and his name was Jimmy Lockery. So my dad wasn't an ice fisherman, didn't have the clothes for it, and didn't have the passion for it, and honestly had to work, because my mom was a stay-at-home mom, had to work 60 hours a week to pay for us to be able to do what we wanted as a family, right? So he wasn't available a lot of times, especially in the wintertime. So Jimmy Lockery, who was a lineman, and they didn't do a whole lot of work in the wintertime because it was frozen, so he was a lineman for the phone company. He would go up Orchard Street, and he would stop at the kid's house, and he would say, you going ice fishing today? Yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. If you got out and you got into the station wagon, you got to go to Canisius Lake and fish for perch that day. And I was telling this story here about the very first sled that I ever sat on was one of the charcoal sleds. So it was a wooden sled that Jimmy had built, had a tray in the front of it, and it had charcoal in it, and he would light it in the morning time, keep your hands warm, and all of us as kids would cycle on and off that sled to warm up, because we had literally Wonder Bread bags on our feet with boots that leaked and not warm enough clothes to be out there. And then about 10 o'clock, he would put on potatoes, onions, and garlic on that same charcoal and cook it up, and that's what we had to eat when we were out on the sled for the day, catching these monster perch.
I can't believe that there isn't a product right now that replicates that, because this sounds like it's amazing. Okay, I'm going to sit on the sled and warm up, and then I'm going to eat potatoes that have been cooked on the back of it.
You need that.
I need this in my life.
I can still smell it. Like, literally, that's how fresh it is in my memory, the garlic. And he had a lot of garlic. Like, he was that guy.
I'd love it.
Yeah. So it was, it was awesome that he did that and took that time for those of us who didn't have someone to drag him out on the ice. We drove him nuts at times, but we also took skates with us, so we would skate around while he was fishing. And, Jimmy was just a great guy. Now, he was a big, tough, burly lineman, and you didn't get out of line with him, for sure. Like, he wasn't one of those pushover dads. He was a guy who'd straighten you up, didn't matter what it was. But that was the neighborhood we grew up in. Everybody's moms and dads was everybody's mom and dad.
So
it was cool.
I grew up in a very similar situation and community, and I don't know if you've ever thought about this, but what do you think his drive was to do that?
You know what? That's a great question, and I don't know that I've ever asked that. Now, I was from his own kids, and his kids were all my friends, obviously. They were a little bit older than me, and some of his kids were a lot older than me, like 10, 15 years. I was the only one allowed to kiss Jimmy's head, and I would kiss his head and run out of the building. So he, like I said, he was a big, tough guy who would give you the back of his hand. But we would have dinner, and I would kiss Jimmy's head. He had a bald spot on the back, and then I would run out the door, and it was like our thing, right? But I don't really know what his connection was and why he drove to do that. I think probably my relationship with Dickie at the time, his son, and then, that's probably why I got invited for sure. But why he actually took us all, I never really asked him, and I wish I would have. Now, that's a great question. I wish I would have asked him.
And what a great role model for other people, too.
Yeah.
I mean, I had numerous people in my life that would take me fishing. My dad fished, but I would have community members that would ask me to come along when they're going to a different lake. My dad didn't fish a lot of different bodies of water, and that was so hugely impactful to me and on my entire life that I hear that story and I go, wow, this is so parallel. And I've thought about that about the people in my community too, is like, why did they do this? Did they have a mentor that did that for them? Because having experienced that, I do it all the time.
Yeah, and me too.
Yeah.
And I think that's why I love so much the education portion. And one of the things that attracted me so much to this world here is the ICE team, right? And the education arm of ICE team and what we do to help other people understand that. Maron can tell you from her perspective, because those guys, I started dragging them out on the ice at probably two. Like, they literally weren't old enough to walk, and I started dragging them out on the ice because I wanted them to experience. I wanted them to have that love that you felt, that love that I felt, and that love that all of us feel when someone takes a personal interest in them and their love of the outdoors.
Yes.
And I think it's both of those things.
And it's funny because when I chatted with Granrud, it brings back some memories from that conversation where he had an individual who taught him down at the local fishing pier, which he still remembers to this day. That was his driving force. And I always reiterate this, and I feel like it's a broken record in some of these podcasts, but sometimes we all take it for granted. Some of the small things we do, for maybe even a kid that's at this show, the conversation you have, that might stick with that person, or that one day at the boat launch when you're waiting for a guide trip and a kid's at the dock and you're like, hey bud, you catching it today yet? No. I want to try this. Put this on. And then the kid So I think it's remarkable to hear that story from you, from everybody we talk to, about how there's these certain situations as kids that we stick to. And if we think these small moments that we put out there as adults don't stick with these kids, we're foolish.
Yeah, today I was literally just before Jack went on and that crew went on upstairs, you guys, I had two kids in the booth looking at rods, and I walked over and I was talking to them about rod action, because that's part of what I taught yesterday, with how important rod action is and how different rod tips and speeds will impart a different action on it to make it look like an aquatic insect. Anyways, I'm talking to these kids about it, and they were very, very enthusiastic, and you could see it in their eyes. They were just, it was almost like looking at a slot machine. Their eyes were just like going, oh my God, this is the best stuff ever. And I'm like, hey, I'm going to give you guys a couple bags of bait. I don't have them with me, but they're up on the hut, because I was up on the stage earlier today. I said, but first, I want you guys to go listen to your peers upstairs and see what they have to say, because I want them to excite you as much as they're excited about this sport, you should go watch your peers so that you know as a role model what you can become, and all you got to do is work hard. You work harder than everybody else in the room, you're going to be a great success. That's what I've tried to impart upon my kids. So anyways, they go, okay, where is it? And I showed them, and I said, check with your parent before you go up, because these guys were, younger than probably when I met Jack. Like, they were that age, right? And so I said, check with your parents before you go up. Go up there and listen to that. When you come back down, I'll give you a couple bags of bait. Anyways, fast forward, we start walking that way. I'm like, I'm going to be doing the podcast during that time. I said I might be too busy. I go, come here, let me give you the bags of bait now, because I won't do it. So I showed them the bait, gave it to them, told them how to use it, when those bugs are available on the thing. It was literally like I gave them $1 million.
Yep.
Biggest smiles on their face. Thank you so much. So much appreciation. And so you don't know. And for all of us listening, for all of us who are ice fishers and go out there, ladies and gentlemen, if you do not think that what you say makes a difference, you're kidding yourself. You're 100% correct there, Matt. And you don't know even the little things, how that's going to make an impact later in life.
Right.
I'll tell you this. I have bought so many jigs, so much fishing tackle in my life. I could never recount all of that. But I can tell you individually, every single bait or jig or waxworm that was given to me by a mentor, 100%, because it was that meaningful.
How many waxworms?
A lot.
Oh, gross. Those are maggots, right?
I do.
Gross. Who touches that stuff?
I ate one for $1 once.
You ate one?
Yeah.
How was it?
It tasted like a peanut.
Tastes like chicken. Really? Like a peanut?
Like a peanut.
All right, so if you're listening, don't eat waxworms.
Oh, man. That's
Unless
awesome.
you get paid at least $1.
Yeah. So how'd you obviously you're taking your kids out fishing at a young age. I want to know some stories when you were younger, like some of the fish you caught. Like, it's so cool. Like, we talked about Don Cox. I don't know if it was Zach. What was his first?
Yeah, it was one of the sons.
His first bluegill was an 11 and a quarter inch sunfish.
Yep.
No, I take that back. His first fish was 11 and a quarter inch sunfish. And he still has never topped it.
Right.
And he was 6 years old.
Right. I mean, where do you go from there, honestly, sincerely?
You quit.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah, it's over. Yeah, you
I'm
become
done.
a chef at that point.
Yeah.
I think.
So what are some early stories you have?
I think probably, similar pathway. Luke, my brother stole my Barbie rod. I think I was probably 4 or 5 and he was probably 3, and I was mad, and he cast it out and he reels it in and he's like yanking on it, and we're all like, and Dad looks, and it's this huge bass, right? So we got this picture of my brother. He's like this big. The bass is like more than half his body, and he's like this on my rod. So I was furious. But
we went out early that day. I was on the dock in Oneida Lake, and I remember him just dropping down, and I remember it taking off, and I'm like, we're not going to get that fish. No way. And sure, he stuck with it. I never touched the rod. I never did anything. He was 4. I remember he was 4.
Yeah.
And because he was a New York sportsman at that time with this fish, and it really literally it was a solid fish for a little man, and he reeled it up, and I did get down and thumb it and get it up for him to take that picture, but he carried that fish around like it was a stuffed animal for 4 hours. That fish did not make it. I apologize to anybody who's listening that's a bass person, but when your son catches that fish, your daughter catches that fish probably ought to make it somewhere other than back in the lake.
Can we make that picture surface of Luke and the Barbie rod and the bass?
Absolutely. I have it.
Luke's going to be listening. We got to see this picture
absolutely.
at some point. We'll throw it up in the comments someplace.
Yeah, right.
I need this picture in my life.
I'll send it to you as soon as we get home. I know right where it is.
Yeah, it's fun.
That fish should have counted as part of yours.
It should have.
You should have got a portion of it since he
Luke
took your
will
Barbie
fight
rod.
me on that to this
Yeah.
day. He
Yeah.
will fight me on that for
Barbie
sure.
rods catch fish.
They do.
Yeah. Oh, no doubt.
They do. Absolutely.
It's crazy. And usually it's the biggest fish. So you can have all this fancy gear. I've done it many times with my kids growing up. This rod, that rod. It never fails. It's the kid that's got the rod with the 12-pound line that's so coily that they got for $19.99. And usually that's going to be the big bite of the day.
Yep.
And it's very entertaining.
And I have still downstairs in my fishing room, like I have one room that's insulated so I can shoot shows in there, and it's pretty quiet, and I still have both of the rods down there.
Nice.
And the only change to either one of those rods is eventually I did put spring bobbers on them so that they could indicate strike in the wintertime too.
Yeah.
But that's the only change. I still have both those rods. They mean more to me than my, literally my $400 rods do.
So wait a second. The Barbie rod, you put a spring bobber on to use ice fishing.
Yep.
I love this.
Yeah.
I love it so much. When I was a kid, we didn't have ice fishing rods. We all had 2-piece push-button spin cast rods and reels.
Yep.
And to use them ice fishing, we took the top half off. So you
Sure.
had this rod that was so stiff, it didn't bend when you caught fish. But I love that you still have those.
Well, I'm so old, Durham, that when we started with fishing rods, we actually still just used sticks off of the trees. That's true. And we used actual cat gut when we caught those fish. So, I'm a little older than you. So.
You sharpened a bone, so
Yes,
you let the
yes,
fish
indeed,
swallow the
yeah.
cube of meat.
Exactly.
Mastodon. And
If I ever go on Survivor,
Mastodon.
I think I can catch that fish that no one else catches.
Yeah.
I love it.
Not naked and afraid, right?
No, I'm not.
Okay.
I'm not about that life. No.
Well, Maron, what's
If I'm
your...
naked, you should be afraid.
Yes. Just the
Fair
thought of
enough.
it actually scared me a little bit.
Yeah.
Maron, what's your first memory of going ice fishing?
So, this is embarrassing. My first memory of going ice fishing has nothing to do with actually catching a fish and a lot to do with making snow angels and eating hot dogs.
Perfect.
Like that was it for me at like probably 3. I don't know,
Yeah.
3 in a
Yeah.
snowsuit, literally
Yeah.
just like toddling out behind my dad. And I made the joke to somebody yesterday at the show. I was like, I don't even know what to put in a bucket because I just follow my dad out. It's been like that since I was 3. It's still like that.
Yeah.
27 years later, I just toddle out behind him and hope for the best, you know? But we used to just have so much fun.
Yeah.
And that's one of the cool things about this sport, I think, is no matter how dedicated you are to it, you can always take a step back and have some fun with it.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really cool piece.
Snow angels and hot dogs. I want to do that now.
It's
Right.
awesome.
Right.
I
I'm
recommend it.
I'm so glad that you say that, though, because I think there's a lot of people that get hung up on the whole idea of we have to catch fish, we have to catch big fish.
Absolutely.
Social media is an awful thing for that because
Right.
people post their big fish pictures and everybody wants to one-up. That's just how we're wired as human beings. But really understanding that those experiences
Yep.
are what stick with you.
Yeah.
And the memories. Yeah,
Exactly.
absolutely.
I've said it so many times before. There are so few fish that I actually remember from my youth in going out ice fishing or fishing open water, but there are so many other memories that stick with me that are so meaningful.
Yep,
And
absolutely.
I love your comment about, you never mentioned a fish that you caught. You were looking across the table at your dad, and if you're listening, you can't see it, but I did. And you looked across your dad, and you're like, we had just so much fun. And it's not about like I caught this giant bluegill, and it
Right.
might be, and that could be part of the fun.
Sure.
But you remember just being like, I just wanted to go ice fishing.
yeah.
And I think it's a common question we get at these shows because we get maybe a mom or a dad that wants to get a kid out fishing. They're trying to get involved. We've never done this, and I think we sometimes get too fixated on maybe the gear, the stuff it takes, versus just like make sure that kid, son or daughter, grandson, granddaughter, whatever, goes out there and has fun and wants to come back because like my kids, I have a wide spectrum of what they consider fun. Jack, he's fishing hard, right? Ben, he may not put a rod in his hand the entire day. He may be lost in the trees or sliding on the ice or eating snacks or doing this or doing that. But again, it goes back to when the day's done, did you have fun and do you want to do it again? And then maybe modifying a little bit of some things we do to make sure that happens for each of those kids.
So I'm blessed to teach some kids clinics, which I think most of us are, right? And we get some pretty sizable kids clinics. One of the things that I always make sure happens on the periphery is, drill half a hole, have a couple hockey sticks there for kids to be able to shoot pucks in. Don't drill all the way through because I found out that's very expensive with pucks. Play a little bit of football if you've got some snow on the ice. Nobody's going to get hurt. Make those snow angels. I remember one of the most fun that I ever had at a tournament. Luke and I went out to, and this was early on in the Maki world, Luke and I went out to a tournament in Reedsburg, Wisconsin, and we drove out. So Luke, the whole way out, was packing bait. So I had made the bait ahead of time, but we didn't have the packages put together yet. So Luke is probably 8 or 9 years old, and he's packaging the bait, and he makes money. He made money. I paid him to do that, so he had his own money when we got to the show. But the most fun we had is because the night before the tournament, we had good pre-fishing, could drive out, no problem. The night before, we got this horrendous ice and snowstorm. And during the tournament, I swear we got probably 18 inches of snow on the lake that year. it was a high pressure, just one of those brutally tough bites. We got our, I don't know, 6 or 8 fish, whatever. And Luke looks at me and he goes, "This just isn't going to happen, is it, Dad?" And I said, "No, I don't think it is today, buddy." He goes, "All right, let's go wrestle." So we go out in the middle of a tournament. Like, we drove across the country to get to this tournament. And we spent the rest of the day with snow angels and wrestling in this really deep snow where nobody could get hurt, so I could throw him around. And now he's 6'3" and can throw me around. And, it's just one of those loving moments as a dad that you never get again.
Yeah.
It's just one of those once-in-a-lifetime things. And it was just a freak nature thing that happened. But here's the thing, I didn't take the tournament so seriously, which sometimes we do as parents, and Maron's a parent now too. We take things so seriously and don't take that step back and say, what really matters today? And what really matters today are everything that all of us have said, the experience that we have together with those people who care enough about us to get us out on the ice. I don't care if that's a parent. I don't care if that's a mentor. I don't care if that's your friends and you guys are just going down there together. Enjoy the experience. And then the world really comes full circle for you when you get a little more gray hair and you start to value those experiences over again. And your tournament days are not over, but you're just not taking it as serious because you don't care anymore if you win. You donate your money, and you have the experience of being together in the brotherhood and sisterhood that is ice fishing. That's the thing I love so much about the sport.
So you don't want to do the whole wrestle in the snow with Luke at this point?
No, Luke at this
Luke
point
will win.
is Luke.
You have no
were
chance.
So quick in
You got
saying
no
that.
chance. Well, he's huge. He's like 6'3". He's bigger than the rest of us.
Right.
We got no chance.
And at this point, he's a lineman. He spends way too much time outdoors doing big physical stuff, putting pole. He's the guy who builds the infrastructure, not the guy who hooks it back up again. So, yeah, he's. I hope he doesn't hear this, but he's been way tougher than me for probably about 6 or 8 years now.
Yeah.
So, I'm not wrestling.
Yeah. We touched on Maki a little bit. The listeners have heard Maki. I think we've done a pretty good job of letting the crowd that we know in this world of ice fishing understand Maki and the advantages. But I think we have to go down that story of you. I didn't know you named it. I just learned that. So I think there's some stuff we can backpedal on. Early days of Maki, infancy stages of how this came to fruition. I want to hear some of that down and dirty on how Maki came to fruition.
Yeah.
I know your brain and how it's wired, scary enough, but I think it'd be great for the listeners to get a little backstory on Maki, how it started, how it got to where it is today, and let's chat about that a bit.
Yeah, so it started very similar to almost every one of our great fishing stories. While we're fishing, it was back in the days of the whip, like the little 3-sided triangle thing that everybody fished. And Matt, you mentioned it in one of the podcasts, I don't remember what it was, but everybody used to kind of slice pieces of plastic off and make their own bait. And because a lot of our aquatic insects, which maybe we'll get to, maybe we won't, are very, very small. Mm-hmm. So it's not like the big baits that are made for open water fishing. So something had to be different. So my buddy Tony pulls out these whips and he says, "Hey, we really probably should do a better job, making these things look like bugs." So it was really kind of his idea. And I'm like, by we, you mean me, right? Because I was teaching mold making, so I'm a school teacher. My big boy job is a school teacher. Still do it, still love it. But I teach shop. So I teach 11th and 12th graders, automated manufacturing, machining, CAD, like all of that fun shop stuff, right?
How many years have you done that now?
I'm 28, I think, this year. Yeah, and I still love it. And so I was teaching mold making that next week. I said, you know what, let me see what I can do. So usually in mold making, we would make like a heart-shaped mold and make some chocolate, and the kids would give it away to their girlfriends, boyfriends, whatever, their parents. But this year I said, when I got my guys together, I said, look, here's what we're going to do. We're going to make a bug. I have no idea how to do it because I'm not that guy, but we're going to figure it out together, because that's how I teach my classroom. I say, look, it's not that we can't know it. It's just that we don't know it yet, so let's go. Yeah. Let's go, baby. That's cool. So I did the mold. I was melting down. I went to Walmart. I bought some Zoom baits. Sorry, Zoom. Melted them in the microwave, shot them into the mold, and I'm like, oh, my God, this is the coolest thing ever. Because I grew up with, what were they called? Creepy crawlers. You guys remember that? You probably don't. You may be old enough, but I don't think so. Yeah. So they were actually candy that you would make and then push in, and they would make a bug. So I made those on Orchard Street, and so it reminded me of that. And so I made it, and my students immediately fell in love with it, and they're like, well, what if we make a mold? I go, that's great, you'll get points. So you got to design the bait. Here's how you're going to get your points. And they said, what if we catch a fish? I said, I want a picture of it. And they said, what if we bring the fish in? Will you make a fish fry for us? I go, yeah, I'll make a fish fry for you. So wait. We're going to get points for making the bait. We're going to get points for the fish fry. I go, yeah, absolutely. We're going to get points for the fish fry.
I want him as a
And I'm
teacher.
Yeah.
That sounds epic.
Oh, it was fun. And during that period of time, I had everybody from inner city kids from Niagara Falls to, real country kids, and so everything in between. But they all fell in love with this project. So the next year I did it again, and the next year I did it again. And so now I got, after I did it and I fell in love with it, I was making molds after the kids went home. And so then I made a few more and a few more. Then fast forward to the championship, and Kevin Riley and Richie Sikorsky win the national championship with the Maki.
Yeah.
Then everybody goes, where do you get these baits? So now all of a sudden they're out of the basement and into the public, and I'm like, okay, I got to get serious now, so we got to figure out what we're going to do. I said, Tony, what do you want to do? He didn't really attach himself to that part of the business anymore, because originally I made molds for him. I wasn't going to do any of this.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't my gig. But then I started making them, and it got to be more and more, and so I had to start making baits and had to get serious about it. So we incorporated back in 2006. We started making baits in 98, and we incorporated 2006. And so it was a slow process. It wasn't like an overnight success story, but it never was meant to be, really. I mean, it was really kind of that thing. So then, fast forward, Maron, I don't know if you remember, on 6 Mile Lake. So we're in our family cottage. We have a family cottage up in Canada, and we're up on 6 Mile Lake. You want to tell that story? Do you remember it or no?
Yeah, so I don't know, how old was I? Probably 7 and 9.
Yeah, it wasn't.
And he wasn't kidding. Like, our boardroom is literally either the kitchen table, the boat, an ice hut. Like, wherever the four of us are together, that's like our board meetings.
I love that.
We're sitting in the boat on 6 Mile Lake, right off of like this little treasure island thing that we used to call it. But
Why did you call it Treasure Island? Tell that story real quick.
Okay, this is a sidetrack, but you could paddle out or you could ride the boat out, and you would go up on this island, and there was always like loonies and toonies up there, like hidden. So me and my brother, when we were little, were like, this is awesome, right? Like somebody left like this awesome stuff. Like, there's always treasure out there. Like, year after year after year, there's always stuff you find, and we're like, this is awesome. Last year, he broke my heart. He goes, me and Mom used to just go out the first day and throw a bunch of coins out there.
Oh my gosh!
And I'm like, no, you're kidding.
Wonderful.
He's like, no. And I'm like, really? So I just found out. But so we're in the boat, we're sitting there, and he goes, what do you guys think about making a bait company? And we're like, what? And he's like, we got to do this better. He's like, I know I can do this better, which is a product of the Scott Brauer life, right? Which is like work ethic to 100, always. Like, there's always something better. There's always something we can improve on. So we're sitting in the boat, and he's like, what the heck are we going to name it? Like, what do you guys want to name it? And me and my brother are like, I don't know, we're like 7 and 9. We're throwing out the dumbest names possible. And then how did we even decide finally?
So my buddy Swamper, which all good stories start with the sentence, my buddy Swamper.
Swamper.
So
Sounds like there's a story.
Durham, you'll like this because you grew up in a small town. So we used to let's say, we used to play darts in the middle of the road. So we would take a dart and we would throw it up in the middle of the road and see who could not move. And if you moved, then you got punched in the arm, right?
Now, wait a second. Excuse me. For the listeners, when you're saying darts, you're not talking about plastic tip darts that you throw at a dartboard nowadays.
No. We're talking about steel tip darts. We would whip them up as high as we could in the road, and then you
Lawn
had to stand
darts.
still on the yellow line. Mm-hmm. Now, traffic sometimes was hard to come by where I grew up, right? And so if you moved, you got to do that. So anyways, my buddy Swamper and we bought a lap streak, Penyan lap streak, because we were running salmon tournaments at the time. So we were fishing salmon tournaments on Lake Ontario. I said, I want to name this boat Making Waves. And so I need to practice with the airbrush, which I'm not a good painter at all. So I would get to M-A-K-I, and I would run out of space on whatever I was trying to. So in my garage on Johnson Creek Road, where we used to play darts, was M-A-K-I painted everywhere, because I would run out of space for the N, and I was going to do waves down below it. So I'm not a smart guy. Like, I know some things, but I'm not a sharp guy, obviously. So Swamper started calling me Mackie back in the early days, and that kind of stuck through our time when we were fishing those salmon tournaments. And so when we're doing it, and I don't know why we didn't want the Brauer name associated. We talked about it on that trip, not associating the Brauer name with Maki Plastic. we got to come up with something that's different because people want to creep on us, whatever. I don't know why we even did that, but we did.
Yeah.
So anyways, I said, what about Maki Plastic? Like, what does that mean? Like, and Pam had a problem with it. She didn't think it was a good name because it said plastic, but it really didn't say fishing bait, right? So she's the smart one. Like, well, Maron is the smart one, and Luke and I are the worker guys, and the girls kind of take care of us. So, anyways, fast forward. That's how it was supposed to be making waves. It wound up being Maki Plastic. We kicked around a lot of dumb names. You remember the one name that the kids were doing? It was the most fun. You remember what that was?
What was it?
It was Papo Gijo Bait.
Oh,
now,
yeah.
For
We were
years, we didn't
screaming it
remember where
across
that
the
came
lake.
from. And we didn't even know how to spell it if we did know where it came from. But then Maron finally watched
With my kids, so full circle again.
Yeah.
Everything comes full
it's
circle.
fun.
My daughter's 4, so we watched the Santa Claus. And when Tim Allen is like arrested and they're interviewing him, he like repeats all the names for Santa Claus, and at some point he like tilts his head back and yells, "Papo Gijo," and we're like, "That's
So
where
it could have
that's
been worse.
from?"
It could have been that name instead of Maki.
Yeah, so
Plastic.
it was almost Santa Claus Plastics on accident.
So I got to go back just to that little bit.
I do too when you're done.
The dart thing in the air. So, have you guys seen the movie Grown Ups?
It's
yeah,
exactly
we were
like
Adam
that.
Sandler,
Exactly
and
like
they
that.
shoot a bow and
Yep.
arrow in the air, and they can't move. And
Yep.
I think David Spade takes one on top of the foot. That's all I'm picturing.
Yeah, well,
That's exactly
there
what
was
it was.
some incidents of injury at that point, but we did a lot of dumb things when we were kids. Growing up in the country, we didn't, especially then. Like, so we're talking about like the late 70s, early 80s. There wasn't a lot going on in the country.
Yeah.
So we would do a lot of dumb stuff like that. And you know what? I'm not above that. And I'll still do dumb stuff today if you guys want to go do it right now.
Want to play darts, Durham?
Well, first off, for anybody who's still wondering about what lawn darts are, they're illegal because they're
True.
dangerous. I've never been a huge risk taker,
Yeah.
but I love that
I
story.
saw your
because-
outfit yesterday.
Well, okay.
Yeah.
I-
That
I'm-
picture
I'm-
is going to surface on this podcast.
I'm
Okay.
a
As it
little
should.
bit of a risk taker, but I probably wouldn't have been involved in that game, but I could totally see all of my buddies playing it.
Yeah.
For sure. Like, we might get hurt, but we don't care.
Yeah.
I want to go back to the whole Treasure Island thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think every parent should do that. I think every parent should find a Treasure Island or something similar
Yep.
where they would do that. How magical is that?
So,
how cool was it as kids? Like, you would probably
It
get...
was awesome. It's like one of our favorite memories. My brother too, because I asked him for his input before we did the podcast, and he was like, "Talk about 6 Mile. Talk about 6 Mile." And that's like that. I don't know. That's how we grew up. And
Yeah.
everybody thinks growing up with Scott Brauer, you're like this big fancy fisherman or fisherwoman, and you have all this cool stuff and all the newest tech and all the newest gear. And when we were little, we didn't have any of that. I mean, we had a Barbie rod and a pack of hot dogs that we cut up and threw in the lake and hope for the best, So there's always room for everybody in the sport, and if you only have $10 to throw at a rod at a thrift shop, that's all you need.
Sure.
I
So
love that.
So, and you said, I think it's funny because you said you're now 30 and you
Yeah.
just found out.
I know.
Like,
yeah,
very, very
literally
recently
within the
that-
last year. Within the last year.
Yeah.
And so Treasure Island, we
That's
can't really
awesome.
take credit for that because our relatives that are up there that own the cottage, right? They actually did that with their kids beforehand. So that Rosie told us about that, and she goes, "You got to keep the Treasure Island thing going." So if you can, the listeners, if you can imagine what the Muskoka area looks like, so it's a lot of vertical rock, a lot of rock outcroppings, but small islands. Like literally, that thing was no more than 50 feet,
Yeah,
right?
at
But
most.
it drops off into, on one side a beaver swamp and on the other side very deep water. So this thing wasn't real big. And I don't know how they never caught on that every day they went out there and, searched through this little island that more money would show up there. But the coolest part is there was a marina that still had penny candy basically. It was probably 10 cents. So they would find $1, then we would ride the boat over to the marina and they would be able to buy that slushy that day or that candy that day, and it was, it was absolutely a blessed time and we are a blessed family, and so it was a lot of fun, and I don't even remember why the truth came out about that, but if when we get up there again with the grandkids, we're going to do the same thing. Next generation is going to see the same thing. Treasure Island will always be Treasure Island in our family, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Sounds like Santa Claus has got nothing on Scott Brauer.
Man, I got to tell you, that story literally choked me up a little bit.
Yeah.
Like, that is...
Yeah, I'm in this stage right
That's
now
amazing.
with some of my kids and the Elf on the Shelf.
Yep.
And it's different but similar, right? Where at your age, you had such a strong belief that this was really like buried treasure, right? Something special, something different, something magical. And I look at it now because I'm in the midst of having to hide the elf every night, and I still have a couple kids who still like are just extremely jacked up about it.
Yep.
And it is magical. It is special. It is different. It's something
It
you
is.
remember your whole life.
Exactly.
I'm not going to ask if you still believe in Santa, but
Who doesn't?
Right, exactly.
I totally agree. Honestly, yesterday, for anybody who hasn't seen or you will see on the podcast, I came dressed up.
you did.
I came dressed to the nines.
Yeah.
In a
Maybe
full-
tens. Might have
Maybe
been tens.
tens.
Sharp.
A white suit painted Wonder Bread. And a cane and a top hat and a bucket of candy canes that were Wonder Bread colored.
Wonder Bread pinhead minnow tie.
Wonder Bread pinhood minnow tie, and a Bluetooth speaker playing Stevie Wonder. But the reason I did that is when you come to the biggest ice show on earth, you want to see magic.
Yeah.
You don't go to Disneyland to see the people that are selling the corn dogs. You go there to see the princesses and Mickey and Minnie Mouse. When you come to the ice show, you want to see something that's outstanding. And it sounds like the experiences you've given your kids are exactly that. Absolutely outstanding.
Yeah, and I have Pam to thank. Like, I'm the face of the Brauer family, no doubt about it, and that's not pretty. But the ones behind the scene are much better looking Brauers, but they're also just good people. Like, I've preached a sermon one Sunday in my church, and it was, in a world of Scott Brauers, be a Pam Brauer. So she really brought that magic out of me as a man. And I taught both of my kids, look for somebody who makes you a better person, and then commit to that person fully. Right.
Amen.
Whatever that looks like. Because if someone makes you want to be a better person, they're probably a person you want to spend time with, and maybe a person you want to spend the rest of your life with.
Yeah. And here's, I got so many fond memories and stories of Scott, but the one thing is more of a theme. And the one thing I think you are so good at, and it's no surprise that you teach, right? But you are always fixated on the youth and educating and bringing someone up. We could be at Clam Pro Day, and Scott will come up to me and tug on my shirt, and it'll be, here, I got all these baits for how many kids do you have out there? That's the first thing you think about.
Yeah.
You're not thinking about what's the newest rod or lure or that or that. The first thing you're doing is you're studying the audience and trying to figure out 1, 2, 3, 4. How many kids do I have here right now? Because I want to make sure they're going to go with some new baits. There's something cool going on. There's something fun going. You're creating that magic, and I think that it's so awesome to see that. Even when you're on the tank, right away you're like, oh, let's get somebody else on the jig tank. You're not looking for Durham or Dave Gentz. You're looking for, that 13-year-old's going to go up on the tank.
Yeah.
Okay, come over here.
Yeah.
And I think it's awesome.
Yeah, and Jack, it's funny, I shared that picture. I don't know if you saw that or not. I shared that picture on social
did.
media. I think it was like 5 or 8 years ago.
Yeah.
Like, he is just such a cool little man who is so light years ahead
Yeah.
of where I was at when he was my age. But it's because of spending time with people like you guys. Like, we have a lot of good pros who are teaching pros, right?
Yeah.
But they don't have the capacity to offer the things that I can offer to kids, which is free bait, right? Basically. And so, there's times when we've had enough for 30 kids, and if there was 40 kids there, you and I have broken the bags down and made
Figure it
40
out.
bags out of 30 bags, right? So that everybody takes that memory home. And really what we're trying to do is that same thing, that same story of what Maron talked about with Luke, and that is catch them that first fish that's magical. You asked me, Matt, what that first fish was, like the Zach caught, or I don't remember which one of the boys it was, one of the Cox boys. My first vivid memory of dragging a fish home from the log pond was a chain picking. Now that is a fish that nobody wants to carry on a bike 3 blocks, and it's a fish you don't want to carry in your hand because their gill plates are very sharp and their teeth are incredibly sharp, and you're going to bleed halfway home. But I was so proud of this thing, and it was 18 and a quarter inches. I remember it like it was yesterday. I was probably 6 or 7. But
Yeah.
back in that day, similar to like what Dave talked about, you left the house in the morning and you got back in the afternoon or night when it was almost dark out or dark out. My dad had this whistle that you could hear for miles. And when he whistled, the neighbor kids would go home.
Yep. We had the same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it was cool. Cool times for sure.
Maron, I've got a question for you.
Sure.
So, growing up then, did you ever have your dad as a teacher for one of your classes?
I did not know, but my husband did,
Oh.
which is a very convoluted story a little bit. We were actually forbidden from speaking to each other
Oh.
because
At
he
the
was
time, yeah,
he was
banned.
interested in me, and my dad said absolutely not.
Yeah.
And he was like-
at the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he was like, what if I teach a fishing clinic? And my dad was like, first of all, you don't know how to do that. And second of all, no.
Yeah.
And he was like, what if I learn about fishing? And my dad was like, you can go fishing with me, but she's not coming.
Yeah.
And did he go?
No.
I actually had it was an application to date my daughter, and at the end of the application, you're going to need this, I'll pass it on to you. You're going to need
boy.
this. At the end of the application, it said, revert back to the top, which says, you are not dating my daughter. It didn't matter what you put on that paper, you were not dating my daughter.
Yeah.
Now, the story is, so Maron, I've mentioned a few times, is incredibly gifted as far as Right goes. She's also a good human being. So she was selected from her school. There's only one kid that got to go to this leadership place. So she would meet in my school, even though I teach at a school that has all different schools that come in for the technology classes. So I have 13 component districts that feed my program. So Eric, my son-in-law, was in my class, really good kid, but not a kid that I would have ever selected to date my daughter, ever. He drove too fast. He did things that I didn't. He did wheelies in the parking lot. That's what the counselor told me, but he didn't really do wheelies. It was a Ranger. You don't do wheelies in a Ranger. No, it's an S10 Mini. So I told him they could never date. Don't ever do that. That's the worst thing you could ever do. Let's fast forward now. But they've given me 2 beautiful grandchildren.
Yeah.
And he's
love
awesome.
Eric. I love Eric. He is one of my best friends. But I would have never selected, when that little punk was sitting in my classroom, him to ever even look at my daughter, let alone date. So these guys were both very good at what they did. Eric was too. Went to the national championship together. They started giving googly eyes to each other, which I didn't see because I would have sent one of them home. Probably Eric. Probably not Maron. She's my precious baby. So anyways, that's how they met, like from my classroom. Because Maron would come out at that leadership group. She would go home with me in the afternoon after they went on their field trip. And so she would hang out in my classroom, and I would just tell all the boys, look down or I'm failing you. And my grandkid, when he gets here, is going to fail your grandkid if you even talk to her.
Yeah.
Like, that's the way I talk to my students.
Yeah.
Because it's all love, but they know it. But
Oh,
so anyways, fast forward, they get married, they give me 2 great grandkids. So, and I love them both, too.
that's an awesome story.
Yeah,
and,
they're
and
fun.
it's a great example that even though as a parent you want the best for your kids. You 100% want the best for your kids. Every parent does. But even though you try to guide them down the path of, well, you should do this or you shouldn't do this, ultimately they're going to make their own decisions. And sometimes they're really good ones.
Yeah, absolutely. She was way smarter than me, like always. So that's all good. I'm okay with not being the smartest guy in the room. I literally have said this, and Matt, you've heard this, Jason. I don't have big lofty goals like the rest of the world. I just want to be smarter than a bluegill. I got enough intelligence surrounding me. They can take care of the rest of it. I just want to be smarter than a bluegill. That's all.
I think you have been, and I think we should chat a little bit about Maki in general and let people know just a little. There might be some listeners that don't know the full breadth of Maki.
Yeah.
You know, they may know that it's a plastic brand or this or that, but I think it'd be neat to chat about some of that and some of your conceptual ideas. You really turned down that whole bug world, right?
Yeah.
That is your thing, and
Right.
I've said this to many people outside of clam world, just in life, that I don't know anybody that has probably put so much focus in their trade as you when it comes to designing Maki Plastics.
Yeah.
The intricacies, why this, and when you get up like on a tank or on a stage and you start to talk about it, like you can't see me if you're not watching, but you just get mesmerized by when you talk about this stuff because it's so important to you.
Yeah.
And it's crazy. I think we should chat a little bit about, okay, why that rabbit hole? Why bugs? Why this? how you've studied the underwater world and how it's kind of come to fruition.
Yeah, so for me, I've read everything from doctoral papers on it to, I wasn't always a bug guy, but I was always a fishing guy. Like, I love to catch fish, and I like to try to figure them out. I was a Jacques Cousteau, grew up watching that show, like it was the best show in the history of shows. And the Wild Kingdom and all of those programs, the only programs that were on TV, because we didn't have YouTube or anything else of that, right? So I wanted to figure out the underwater world, right? And so the bugs and how that kind of came to fruition was that first start in my classroom. But then I really got into it when I started to look at, why are the fish interacting with these bugs? How often does that occur? And then ultimately, how can we best mimic what happens on a bait? And ultimately, our whole goal from the beginning of time has been to just put more fish in a bucket for people, whether they're going to eat them, whether they're going to catch their first fish. It was never really to win tournaments. It was never really to become a business that was successful. It was never really to lead the way in the bug world. It wasn't any of that. It was just to help mom and dads or people catch more fish in general. So I started studying those things that are very challenging for some people to understand. And I think if anything that I'm good at as a teacher, it's looking at a thing and then making it easy for people to understand. And that's really what I'm trying to do, is relate to something in their world. So Matt, you say when I start speaking, people get that look on their face, they start to get mesmerized. But really what I'm looking for is that head nod when someone really understands it, because until then, I don't know that what I'm saying is really kind of making sense to them in their world.
Sure.
So I think you learn an awful lot, and good fishermen do this a lot. And I think, Jason, you talked about this when you guys did the first show, and that is a lot of times I'll sit back and I'll watch Matt fish, right? I don't have to ask him what he's doing. I can just watch him do what he does, and then I can pick up hints from him, right? And I've done that from everybody from people, Maron brought it up, people that are just starting in this trade, and people that are, winning the national championship and on the national team. But if you just spend enough time watching people do their craft that are good at it, set the hook, try to figure out where that happens in your world, you can start to really put together the pieces of the puzzle that make you a better fisher person, right? But in the same respect, you have to learn to watch fish. So when it was affordable enough that you wouldn't get a divorce for buying an underwater camera, I got hooked on the underwater world. And I swear, to this day, even with some of the best speakers I've ever heard, I've learned more by watching fish than I've ever learned from a fisherman.
Right.
Because if you will just pay attention to the way that they flare their gills, to the way that they address a bait when they come up to it, to the way that they skate away when you've done something wrong, and I do that more times than I do something well, you can learn an awful lot from every species of fish just by watching it. So for any people who are listening, just do underwater fish.
Yeah.
Freshwater, underwater, catching bluegills. And then just watch how they're jigging and the cadence of that, what they're jigging with, and how the fish are interacting with that, and when they go and when they don't. I mean, most people don't share the videos of nauseum that I have on my computer when fish don't bite.
Right.
But there you can learn just as much, and actually more, I think, when fish don't bite than when they do bite. And a lot of this has to happen, and this is why I love ice fishing, one of my passions, and where it really got started is either sight fishing, whether it's with a camera or looking down the hole, and just watching how what we do makes an impact on that fish. One of the fish that I love to fish most in the middle of our country is red ear sunfish. And red ear sunfish will sit there for 4 hours underneath you until it's time for them to eat. And I don't care if you bump them in the nose, they just sit there and they know they're the alpha sunfish in this world, in Michigan, and they don't move until they decide that it's time to eat.
Yeah.
And I've switched things, and I think being German and very stubborn has helped me become a better fisherman, because the most I've ever changed, and I counted it this particular day because it got laughable, was 48 times before I got bluegills to go. 48 different changes with jigs or plastics or something. And I knew what they ate that day because I caught a couple small fish, If you're going to keep fish that day anyways, cut a fish open, take a look at what's in there. That's as good of information as you can get anywhere. It's lifetime food, lifetime feeding. Look at the color of whatever they're eating, and look at what they're actually eating. And then when you do that, you'll know 2 of those pieces of puzzle. And how do you deliver it to them? And how do you jig it in a way with cadence and rod tips to move it in a way that it looks like that aquatic insect? And that makes your catch percentage go through the roof because you've got lifetime information from the fish, right? And that makes perfect sense. But then there's times when those rules just don't apply, and some big fish, they just don't apply because they don't know the rules that we make up as fishermen in our own heads, right?
Yeah. I think that's such a great tip, and we all like to harvest fish. I mean, I don't think any of us have ever gotten on this show or ever just saying, let everything go, right? We keep fish. We like to eat fish.
Right.
And I think too many anglers don't investigate what's going inside the stomachs of these fish, whether it's a bluegill, whether if you're listening and you're a big-time walleye angler, you might learn real quick exactly what these fish want to eat, and it might make a big difference. Grand Root, we got a piece coming out. Oh, by the way, I was told by text that I'm supposed to say the Minnesota Wild won in a shootout like 2 minutes ago.
Oh, nice.
Oh, sweet.
Nice.
So the game's going on, shootout, cool for anyone listening. But Grand Root, we got a great video coming out this week on a day in the ice. And we've teased it a little bit. And on this video, you'll see a piece where his wife, Kelly, catches a walleye, and hooked onto her hook is something that walleye ate that was not, they didn't put it on their hook.
Mm-hmm.
And you see those moments, and right away you're like, okay, that is clearly a shiner, this big or whatever. Match the hatch, figure out what these fish are eating, and it can make a big difference. Like in the fly fishing world, that's everything.
Yep. And that's a lot of the papers I read. A lot of the stuff I read is in the fly fishing world because they have very good hooks, better hooks than we have in the normal world. So I use an awful lot of scud hooks. I use an awful lot of Daiichi, and I'm not going to name too many names, but good quality hooks, invest in those because it'll save you a lot of, like, especially when you get older and a little bit slower, the hook set, it'll save you some of that stuff. But that fly fishing world really invented the match the hatch. I just took it into plastic baits as opposed to tied flies so that everybody could have them in their pocket, right? And you could have a pocket full of them, so no matter what the fish spit out. And even sizable, we were, I forget where that place was in the Catskills that we stayed at, that house in the Catskills, but there was, I caught a big walleye, and this is, if you don't want to harvest fish, there's a way to do it too. Fill a little water in your bucket, throw that fish in there, let them swim around for a while. Within 15 minutes, a captive fish will usually expel what they eat.
Yep.
So whether it's in a live well, whether it's in a bucket in the wintertime, keep your bucket inside. If you don't want to cut that fish that day, put it in there, look at what that fish spits out. So anyways, we're in this place in the Catskills now. This is a homeowner association thing. Phenomenal sunfish, perch, everything was trophy size. So Luke gets the elusive 30 and a half inch walleye there. I throw that walleye, I know, send the hate mail to Scott Brauer at scottbrauer.com. We were eating fish that night, so I took that 30-inch fish out of that water table. I'm sorry, Jason. I know you just cried a tear.
No, it's okay. No, it's okay.
I know you cried a tear right there.
No, I love it.
I put him in the live well. Look in the bottom at the end. The picture, if you've ever seen my pictures of bloodworms on the tip of my finger, and I shared those pictures a little bit on social media and otherwise, that fish was fully gorged on North American bloodworms.
30-inch walleye.
Yep, 30-inch walleye. All fish, big, small, medium, feed on these aquatic insects. Some papers say up to 80% of their diet in the wintertime comes from aquatic insects. For those of us who do not take advantage of that, you need to rethink why you're doing that, because those aquatic insects, and think about it in terms of of any activity. So in the wintertime, these fish know their inactivity is a little bit slower, and so as they have to move to eat, they're going to expel more energy than they're going to take in, unless what they're eating moves very, very slowly or is captive in the weeds on the bottom of a lake, the bottom of that sticky bottom where it all comes together. They're going to chase the most amount of protein and expel the least amount of energy to get that protein, because they know if they don't bulk up and take advantage of that, they're not going to be able to sit on their nests in the springtime. So all winter long, as they start to gorge on, there is a strong bite of young of the year fish, and that happens from now till about February. Most people, I would venture a guess, most people who use minnows to fish don't realize there's not a whole lot of minnows in the lakes.
Right.
But there is small fish, which is what a minnow imitates. And so they're eating little crappies will eat, or big crappies will eat little crappies.
Yeah.
They don't care.
No.
Yeah.
So that year young bite does occur, but later in the spring, in the early spring and before ice out, the aquatic insects again become critically important, because those schools have all kind of been picked through a little bit. They've been slashed at, killed off, picked through. The rest of them have learned to stay in cover, but the aquatic insects are all still very available. And one of the things, and I think you mentioned it, Jason, early on, not in this show, but in another show at some point, don't be afraid to fish, and I think it was you, real shallow at that last ice. And the reason is, and most people I would say probably don't even know why that is, but it's an absolute truism, and it is because the aquatic insects that are going to become terrestrial start to move their way through the lake into the weeds, because as soon as that shore ice goes, they become terrestrial and start to take off into their next section. For a long period of time, they live between the water and the ground. So big perch, giant perch in that late season, the reason that those fish are where they are in those very shallows is, one, because the water feels better to them, because they've got run in from the sides typically, it's action, but there's also an overabundance of food there, because all of those bugs now that are changing from the larval stage to their more adult stage are starting to creep up those shorelines. So if you kick a rock over, instead of just saying, oh my God, look, the lake's going, start looking around those shorelines and the weeds and the rest of it. You're going to find an awful lot of food source there that's super easy for the fish to catch. So they know they're going to have to sit on a nest, so they're going to take the easiest meal possible. It's like me going over to the donut shop and getting a bucket or a basket of donuts. I'm going to have to eat a bucket of donuts, so I got to fly back to Buffalo tomorrow.
You made a comment earlier on, you said, I don't need to be the smartest man in the room. I just want to outsmart the bluegill. I just listened to 10 minutes of proving that Scott is much smarter than a bluegill. It's that kind of stuff that I think, if you want my honest opinion on what's probably missing from an informational point of our industry, we're so saturated with a lot of this, a similar conversation. How to catch a walleye. Oh, you get on a rock point, they come in at low light, you use this, right? I think what we're missing, honestly, is some of the stuff that you're trying to teach.
Yeah.
The true details of it, the next level stuff. And I think that the way it's presented is probably what scares people, in my opinion. Meaning, we're simplistic.
Yeah.
And when you start talking about some of the things you said, people are kind of like, oh, that's over my head. But it's really not.
Yeah.
It's not.
It's not.
It makes sense.
Yeah.
It's the connective tissue.
Yeah.
And is the reasoning why fish do something. We can tell people how to fish and do this, but why would they react to that?
Right.
Why would they eat this bait?
Yeah. When you look at, I learned a few years back, rock ledge. So a sharp ledge, like get the picture in your mind coming down on a lake. Let's say it's 15, 18 feet deep. It goes to that flat bottom. You look at those inside turns. Everybody says inside turn, but why is that a thing? Well, when the water flows around there, that inside turn, that back eddy that it makes it, guess what? All of those eggs, all of those dead animals, even those dead micro and macro invertebrates, they all go into that back eddy and they sit there. Why are the fish tight to the rocks where it bottom flattens out? Because gravity. Eggs that are hatched or drop down into those rocks eventually become right at that point of contact. So Matt, you and I are sitting 3 feet away from each other, and let's say 3 feet beyond that, if I'm off that by 6 feet, that rock ledge where it comes down to the bottom, there's no exit because the bottom's flat, right?
Sure.
So they trickle down through those rocks, it flattens out, and it goes there. Those detail to nauseam things are what I did. My crowning achievement, I hope Genzi listens to this, was I was sitting in a seminar one time. I was sitting in Dave's seminar and I'm listening, and somebody asked a question about aquatic insects, and he goes, I have one of the brightest minds in the country about aquatic insects. I want to call Scott up and let him answer this question. So it was about bluegills and it was about crustaceans. I went into a 5 to 15 minute dissertation on what they eat, how they eat it, blah, 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 blah. It was like when Dave called me up there, the clouds opened and the angels sung, and it was my crowning moment as a human being besides making Maron and Luke. I had to throw that in as cover. But it was my crowning moment. Really, I was so excited about that, and I'm like, I've made it. This is the point, which I know I've made it. So I get through this 5-minute dissertation, and Genzi, like only he can, says, yeah, but they're bluegills. Throw a couple of Eurolov on, you're going to catch them. And so I went from the highest of high in the history of ever to, yeah, but they're bluegills. Just throw some Eurolov on. They're gonna eat them.
Maron, I got to ask you, when you're sitting around the table at dinner when you were younger, would your dad sometimes go into one of these tangents and start talking about the underwater world and environment and invertebrates? And
So I can remember before we did, I think it was maybe one of the fall shows, we were eating dinner and I don't even know what we were talking about, and all of a sudden, like, out from under the table comes like this case, and he's got like pictures of bugs and like maps of the lake, and he's like planning out his seminars, and my mom just keeps like sliding them further away, and she's like, not at the table, not at the table, I don't want to look at that, not at the table. So yes, all the time. And I think I've heard his spiels several times, but like to Matt's point, I think I learn something every time I hear it. Right? Like you could hear it 15 times and you learn a new fact every time you listen, for sure.
Or a way it applies to something.
Right.
Even if you hear the same thing.
Right.
It may click differently on how you're applying a current bite. Like, you know what? I've heard that before, but no, that makes perfect sense now for what I'm experiencing on Lake A, B, or C in this certain bite. Because we laugh. You don't want to be smarter than a bluegill. And Dave's comment, bluegill. But I'll tell you what, Never always makes the comment, a bluegill's brain's the size of my pinky nail? Sure. Yep. And I always laugh because at the end of the day, we do get outsmart by these bluegills all the time. And maybe it's not outsmart. Maybe they're so dumb that they don't bite. Maybe it's such the opposite end of the spectrum.
Right.
But we do.
Yeah.
There's a reason big bluegills kick our butts.
Right.
All the time.
Yeah, those trophy-sized fish are not easy, and a lot of people, it's funny. I was talking to Riti about it before we came on the air, and we were talking about bluegills because when we get together, that's what we do. At a show, to learn from each other, so that we can share with other people these stories, right? But one of the things that we were talking about is that tiny little microscopic brain and how often it outsmarts us, especially trophy-sized fish of any size. They're like trophy deer, like a big buck will almost always carry a button buck with it through hunting season to push that button buck out to be sacrificed so that he doesn't get killed. Well, big fish are smart because they're still swimming. They're smarter than the rest of the fish around them. They've seen an awful lot of what we can do. So I guess my point is, don't be afraid to try new things. Don't be afraid to do new things. Don't be afraid to, and this is where Maki Plastics started, is don't be afraid to experiment with stuff you don't know about.
Yeah.
It's not that you can't know it. It's that you don't know it right now today, but you can know it. You just have to apply, like what Maron said, work ethic, right? You want to know it? Go know it. It's easier today to know it than, when you guys talked about early on, the magazines that you got and all of them, and we read them cover to cover probably 2 or 3 times because that was the only information that was out there. Well, there's a whole lot of information out there today. Guys like Jack and Jack's really peers are going to be teaching that next generation, and they're already teaching us. If you're humble enough to sit back and close your mouth and listen more than you talk, you're going to learn an awful lot by listening to. Even, I mentioned today from the stage that I've learned more sitting on a bucket for an old guy who had none of this stuff. Still, to this day, sitting in the middle of the lake and somewhere, I'll always pull up a seat and sit down and say, hey, what's going on?
Yeah.
How are you? And then when I leave them some plastic. They don't know who I am, and I'm nobody anyways, but, I'm recognized more than I used to be. But it's just that humbleness and that humility, whether it's from the fish, whether you're so humble you're willing to listen to the fish, or a human being next to you that make you that learner that can do and be whatever you want to do and be. It's not that you can't know it, you just don't know it yet.
Yeah. And I love how abstract you are at times. Like you have designed through molds and drawings and all this intricacy of how you've studied bugs. You've designed out of the package some of the coolest looking plastics that are supposed to imitate exactly what we need, right? But in my conversation with you over the years, it's still not enough for you. You're still taking the coolest design drawn on paper, this, and modifying it. You're still pulling a appendage off of this one or tweaking. You're always preaching that. Like, you don't have to fish this out of the package. Even though I designed what I think is the perfect Daphnia imitation, take this one segment off, take this one little piece off, and look at what it does now. And I think as anglers, we don't do that enough.
Right.
We are always fishing things as face value. We're not modifying. We're not getting creative. And I think if there's any snippet out of this podcast that I would like to just push onto our listeners is outside the box.
Yeah.
That term is thrown around a lot, but it really has some powerful meaning. Fishing outside the box, oftentimes and in many situations, is the key to success. In my opinion. Whether it's looking for food inside the belly of a fish you just caught, whether it's changing this or changing that, whether it's thinking a little differently or thinking more like a bluegill or thinking about the inside turn and the eggs, like mind blown. Like, this is the stuff that I'm telling you, people just don't comprehend. And I'm not, and most of our listeners are probably smarter people than us. Sure, right?
No doubt.
But it's the outside the box thinking, I think, at times, and that's what you've really done with Maki for this industry, is the outside the box thinking that helps us ultimately catch more fish.
And I learned that from my students really more than anything else, because they're not afraid to take risks. So many times in education they've been taught to know something between Monday and Friday, and then after that it doesn't really matter. But what I try to teach my kids is, I'm not going to teach you what to know, I'm going to teach you how to know stuff, so that you can teach the next generation, so that you can teach that next piece. But that outside of the box stuff comes from people like Jack, like your son, that have been exposed to things, but then have created their own way with it.
Sure.
When you talk to people, and this is where we get arrogant as fishermen, sometimes we think that we as quote-unquote pros, whether that's promotional staff, professional, if you're fishing professionally, whatever that looks like, that someone who just starts in this sport, someone like Maron who doesn't get the opportunity because she's so busy to fish, can't teach us things. That's so arrogant. Sometimes it's the untrained mind that's better at coming up with these outside of the box things than the very trained mind.
I would 100%
please
agree.
feel a value. If you are trained, untrained, pro, not pro, unpro, whatever that looks like, you have something to add to this puzzle. And Ice Team wants that out of the box thinking. Help us push that out to someone else. When you've seen something that's successful, help other people know that. If you take that to your grave, you're only one person that knows that.
Right.
You share that with one person or 10 people, they share it with 10. That's 100 people who know what you know now.
Right.
And then maybe there's 1,000 next year. Right? That piece of it is so important for the sport, and that's why I love ice fishing.
That's some powerful advice.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'm taking this all in, and I'm taking the approach of doing more listening, because it's just like, you're filling my cup right now, man. It's awesome.
The cuppeth, what do they say? The cuppeth is floweth?
No, runneth over.
Runneth. Yeah.
Runneth over.
Man, dude, I tell you what, Scott, you are such a wealth of information. We're so lucky. I love the stories we got from our end. I feel like there's more, though. There's got to be something else. We've been talking for 75 minutes, and it goes so fast. And I'm telling you, we could sit here. I could talk. We could talk till the lights come off. But there's got to be something deep in that vault that we got to know.
I have two great things
Yes.
I thought of. One is his most important invention. Maki has for sure been innovative and changed the ice fishing game for sure.
Yep.
But there is something that he invented that tops that, and that is called the snackle box.
The snackle box.
Yes.
Yep.
And he has prepared one for me every time we have gone out on the ice my whole life. It includes Swedish fish, M&Ms, and whatever else fits in the little compartments.
Yeah.
And if that one doesn't go out with us, I don't go out.
Yeah.
It's very important.
So some people leave their Vexlar at home and they don't go fishing. if the snackle box is at home,
Yes.
you don't go fishing.
And I would encourage everyone to demand one from their fishing partner.
And
For
I've,
sure.
I've seen some of this on social media recently about the snackle box within the last year or so, but you've been doing this for a
Forever,
very
yeah.
long
Since
time.
she was a baby, we actually danced to that song. She thinks we're just fishing when we dance at her wedding. Now I'll cry instead of you, Durham. But you know,
I didn't
those
say I
life-
was crying. I said I got a little verklempt. That's it.
Yeah, well, I saw the tears, but whatever. But you know, when we danced to that song has so much meaning. If you never listened to it, look it up on whatever. But
What was the song?
She thinks we're just fishing.
She thinks we're just fishing.
Yeah, so
okay.
it really talks about how important life is, and you know, we would do that. And I remember our trip to Arundecoit Bay was one of my favorite fishing trips ever. You know, you think about all of the trips that I've taken. You know, I've been blessed to fish with some of the best fishermen in our country, but the ones that mean the most to me are, you know, those stupid things playing with that day that you and I spent. I took some video that day of me reeling in a fish, and you know, that whole thing, you know, just that snackle box was how I could get Maron out there, because otherwise she really truly had no interest. You know, because she had her nose in a book.
I do catch fish.
She does,
You make me sound
100%.
like I don't, but I do. I
She
do.
had her nose
But
in
the
a book
snacks
since the
are
time
important.
she was 3. So, you know, she's just that super bright human that you have to motivate in other ways. And in this case, it's Swedish fish and M&Ms, and that's all you need.
It happens.
The weight of Maron's heart. Swedish fish and M&Ms.
I get a lot of motivation from both.
Yeah, as you should.
Yeah.
As you should.
You wouldn't believe how much motivation I can give a kindergartner with half of a gummy bear.
See, there's something to it. I'm telling you.
Are you biting it in half?
No.
He eats the other half. Yeah.
I think the most important Scott Brauer fact that everyone should know before we wrap up is his most favorite CD that he plays on the boat that he will blast across any lake regardless of the situation. And that is Sean Paul.
Oh, Sean Paul.
You wouldn't get that from me, you know, normally, but like I don't know why I like Sean Paul's music. I don't even understand half the words. I sing them. So it's funny because back in Gastown, I'm known for singing on my tractor with headphones on at the top of my lungs. My neighbors all shut their windows when I mow my lawn, not because of the tractor, but because of my singing voice. But maybe someday from the booth, if we can get the right DJ to open up for me, maybe I'll sing a little Sean Paul.
I love this. I love to sing.
Yeah.
You give me any opportunity to sing, and I will step up to the plate. I want to sing with you. I'll bring my guitar.
We need it. We
Yeah.
need it on a
We're
Bluetooth
good, buddy.
speaker. Did you bring the speaker today?
I actually didn't. I
I
left
mean,
it in the
I'm
hotel
thinking
room, but-
like right now's an opportunity.
Yeah.
It could be. Chick, baby.
Where's Danny Vu? Where's Danny Vu?
DJ Danny Vu,
Huh?
he's right.
We need
I
the
just saw
DJ.
it.
No, we got to get
Vu.
Danny, my boy.
DJ Danny Vu.
Yeah, absolutely.
Maron had one other story that she told me she was going to tell. I don't know if you're going to tell it or not, but she mentioned why I became an ice fisherman earlier
Okay,
today.
yes. So this is also a Luke
This comes
collaboration.
from Luke, actually.
We were joking today, and we said Dad switched gears and went specifically to ice because one of our most favorite memories as children, or maybe unfavorite memories as children, was every time we left a lake with the boat, Dad fell in. Every single time. Every time we docked the boat or put it back up on the trailer, he fell in. Every time.
Now you got to understand, I have all of the manufacturing equipment that a person could have. But
Yeah.
you think I'd be? That's why I'm saying, dude, I'm not a smart man. I just know some things. You think I would be smart enough that on the tongue of my trailer, after the 10th time taking a drink, that I would put some steps going out there so I could get the boat, pull it up on? This is before the automatic hookups. Now I have that, so I don't get wet anymore.
Yeah.
Well, that's not true. Not with that boat, I don't get wet. With my pontoon, I'll still get wet. But the truth is, I have trouble staying. I don't have the best balance in the world.
Yeah.
You know? So
Yeah.
I have trouble staying on that tongue.
Well, you know, Scott, I like to look at the positive of everything. Okay? And the positive out of that is during this time period where this was happening most frequently, cell phones weren't invented yet, so you weren't soaking
That's
one
true.
every time
That's
you went
true.
fishing.
But we
Valid-
did learn
valid
colorful
point.
words as children. We learned very colorful words.
And there's no video proof of me falling in the lake, so
Exactly.
it may have never happened.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh my
That is a
gosh.
true story. I do go in an awful lot, and I do say colorful words.
Have you ever gone through the ice?
Yes. So early on, you know, it's almost like, and I discourage all of this, but it's almost like a badge of honor when you first start that, you know, I went through checking the shore ice, whatever. And we have to be so careful out there because where we fish out in New York, there's an awful lot of springs, which there is here too, but we have a lot of those spring-fed lakes, and it's dangerous. Like, it's a dangerous sport. I think I was talking to somebody here at the show. One of the reasons this is such a strong, and I don't mean to over-dramatize it, brother and sisterhood is because we're literally, our hands are in each other's lives. If Matt goes in, I've got a safety rope to throw to him, and unfortunately I've been on both sides of that, where I've been in and had to been rescued, and I've had to rescue other people. And I remember the last time I talked to Jimmy was here at this show. He and I went to get a hot dog. We were sitting around the garbage can. You have no idea that that's the last time you ever talked to him.
Right.
Because I would have had such a different, you can't know that, right? But it is a sport that if you're new to it, it's not like fishing from the shore. You have to be careful. Go with someone who knows what they're doing. And just be super careful with a spud bar, with reading ice. Now I've become pretty adept at it, but it's easy to look at a YouTube video and think anybody can walk out any ice and it's going to be safe.
Yeah.
And that's the furthest thing from the truth.
That's good
Even
advice.
in the depths of winter, if there is the earth farts every day,
Yep.
and those farts are gas pockets. Those gas pockets can degrade any pocket of water, any ice that's floating. Ice is just like ice in your cup. It's just floating on the top of the surface of the lake. And you can go through that, even in deep water, shallow water, whatever. So we have to be so careful to warn people if you don't know that. And I'm not trying to discourage you from going out on the ice. It's one of my greatest loves, being out there. But you have to be super careful with that. So yeah, I have been through, and it's not a lot of fun. But just, you have to also just be ready for it. And if it happens, don't panic.
Yeah.
Panic kills people.
I think that really the ice fishing community has done a good job of reminding each other about that safety factor of it. Just a week ago, we had this incident on Upper Red Lake where a big sheet of ice broke off. And a lot of people wanted to comment that, these anglers were dumb. They made a stupid mistake and they shouldn't be out there. And, where we live, this is part of our lives. This is part of our heritage. This is what we do. And in reality, with the number of people that ice fish, the number of incidents that occur are very, very low. In fact, I was talking to somebody today and I said, do you think you're more likely to have an injury or a fatality ice fishing or get bitten by a shark? And they said probably get bitten by a shark. But that doesn't mean that we should go into shark-infested waters.
Correct.
Yeah.
You always have to be safe. You always have to be alert to everything around you when you're out ice fishing.
Yep. And, again, that's our message when we teach, right? We almost always start every seminar, doesn't matter what it's going to be, with a little bit of ice safety. That's because if there's someone who has not been reached, those are the people we want to reach.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a good message. We could talk all day. When we knew we were going to do podcasts at the St. Paul Ice Show, what was the first name we both mentioned? We got to sit down with Scott.
We have to.
I appreciate that. And I just want to say, for you guys, like, I've listened to most of the shows. I'm not all the way through because I don't get a lot of travel time. I will now that the ice season starts. I listen to podcasts in the wintertime, driving back and forth to lakes, right? But in the summertime, I'm pretty busy making bait for clam, and so for the Maki world. So what a fine job you guys are doing, just bringing out the backstories, and so entertaining. I have hearing aids. I'm deaf, for anybody who doesn't know. I wear those hearing aids. So Pam and I are sitting on a plane. We went down to Lauderdale to fish a couple weekends ago for the weekend because she puts up with me, and so I'm literally sitting next to her on the plane giggling like a mental patient, and she's like, people are gonna think you're crazy because you can't see my hearing aids.
Yeah.
So I'm listening to the podcast, giggling in the corner of a plane, and she's like, people are looking at you. And I'm like, oh, well, I was listening to the Big End story. I don't care. But you guys, I just want to thank you so much. And Clam, too, for putting this out, because literally they couldn't have picked two nicer guys, two easier guys to talk to, right, man? And literally the stories that are coming out of this are going to be hopefully ones that people can learn from, and then ultimately, maybe somebody who listens today is the next Maki Plastic, right?
Yeah.
And it's because you guys chose to spend your time to do this, to educate other people. That is such a critical piece. You will reach, and you have reached already, more people than anybody could possibly know. But I wanted to thank you guys, not for having me on, because whatever with me, but because of what you're doing for everybody in our community. So.
Well, thank you. I
Yeah.
mean, to be able to sit down with people like you two and hear your stories.
Yeah.
Man, I got a lot out of this today.
Yeah.
Just personally, I did.
If you don't think Jason and I are as excited or have as much fun as the guests, you're kidding.
Right.
Oh, I'm sure
Like
you do,
we
Bill.
have, and think about it, we get to do this with all the guests. You get to hop on once with us. We get to do this a whole bunch of times with all kinds of fun people. Any parting words of advice, anything either of you would like to say before we cut you loose and get back on the floor?
You want to go first?
I think for me, mostly just like don't be afraid to get out there. Don't be afraid to ask for advice.
Yeah.
It's a very welcoming community. It's a very open community. Even if you don't know anybody, you don't know kind of what you're doing, you don't feel like you know what you're doing, ask the person next to you. Scoot your bucket over a couple holes and see what they're doing. Kind of watch and learn from them. And like Dad said, you can learn from anybody. From the 3-year-old kid that just pulled a teeny tiny bluegill out of the ice to the old man sitting on the bucket across the lake, and just feel welcome to kind of join the coolest sport in the world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well said.
Yeah, and for me, it's just, if you listen to this, if you learned anything, if you've been inspired by anything, don't be afraid to be that person for someone else, because you never know how important what you say, what you do is going to be to that other human being, and sometimes we're the only people. I say this to my kids all the time, and my students specifically. I say, if not us, then who is going to do that, right?
Yeah.
So take that advantage, take that opportunity for yourself to really inspire the next generation of anything, hunting, fishing, basket weaving, I don't care what it is. And work really hard at it. And understand, please, all of you younger people that are listening to this podcast, work harder than everybody else in the room. Be the first one there and the last one to leave.
Yeah.
And you're going to be super successful in life. Even if nobody notices it, you will be super successful, because eventually that's going to come out. It's going to come back to you. And I've got more from people and I appreciate all the kind words that you guys said, but I've got more from people than I've ever given to people. And go at the world with that heart, and you'll always be willing to learn and always be willing to teach.
Well, I don't know if we can thank the two of them enough. Thank you so much. I mean, if people need to listen to this one, I think there's so much information here that's just not story-driven, just intellect and abstract thinking. So thank you so much for joining on this. It's
Yeah, it was
been
a lot of
awesome.
fun.
Yeah, thanks
Yeah,
for
I love the stories, some of the dirt. I know what to get Scott for Christmas. How does he say it? Just give me the love.
Yes, exactly. That's it.
I just picture Scott jamming
my
out to
phone
Sean
right now.
Paul.
You want me to play
I'm
it?
getting you a shirt.
Oh, you probably
Some will give it to, some will give it to. You guys want to go down right now? We'll go down right now.
take us out, Scott.
It's so funny, because if you could see my face, you would never think Sean Paul on my face. But
It wasn't what I thought you
my
were going to
man.
throw out.
I
there,
was
I'll tell you
picturing
that.
like it's gonna be something like a Britney Spears. I was thinking like Britney Spears, just like Backstreet Boys,
Direction.
something like that, But thank you so much for joining us. On
thanks so
this.
much for having
Thank
us
you,
on.
yeah.
Love
Yeah,
having
it's
you.
a lot
We're
of fun. Awful lot of fun.
So blessed to have you
Yeah,
a part of the
thanks.
team and rock and roll. Jason, anything to add before we sign off?
I'm just going to sign us off the way I usually do, piggybacking on your story from earlier. And I always tell people, be safe, be smart, and be a hero. Take somebody fishing.
That's the way to do it.
Love it.